On the dark, quiet edge of the Arabian Sea, long before sunrise, an old man walked the shoreline. He was frail, solitary, and trapped in deep poverty. Despite his desperation, the fisherman adhered to a rigid, unyielding routine. He allowed himself exactly 4 throws of his net each day, operating entirely on faith rather than the greedy pursuit of a larger haul. On this particular morning, that faith was severely tested. His first agonizing pull yielded nothing but the rotting carcass of a donkey. His second cast dragged up a heavy load of mud and stones. His third brought up only broken glass and tangled seaweed, tearing his net in the process. These compounding, exhausting failures left him with nothing. His muscles burned out, his tools damaged, and he was staring down the reality of starvation, relying entirely on one final, fateful attempt. Looking up at the early morning sky, the exhausted man offered a quiet prayer, fully aware that this 4th cast was his literal last resort for survival. The net sank deep, and when he hauled it onto the sand, it held a heavy brass vessel. It was completely untouched by rust, covered in intricate, high-status inlays. If you look closely at the calligraphy etched into the metal, it functions as a warning. It is a mystical containment seal, placed there by King Solomon centuries ago. But a starving man doesn't care about ancient history. Driven entirely by the thought of selling the brass to feed his family, the fisherman pried the seal open. Instantly, a violent pillar of dense, black smoke erupted from the narrow spout. It expanded so rapidly that it swallowed the dawn sky, plunging the entire coastline into sudden darkness. In his desperate pursuit of a single meal, the fisherman had unwittingly cracked open a supernatural prison, trading the slow threat of starvation for an immediate, lethal crisis. The massive column of smoke began to solidify, twisting into the terrifying shape of a colossal jinni. Its eyes glowed like fire, and when it finally spoke, its voice hit with the physical force of a hurricane. This diagram shows the textbook definition of an asymmetric conflict. On one side, you have a frail, exhausted human silhouette. On the other, a rapidly expanding apex predator, representing an absolute, unbridgeable physical power imbalance. The entity immediately roared toward the sky, begging King Solomon for forgiveness, entirely convinced that his ancient captor was the one who had finally opened the jar. Terrified, the fisherman managed to stammer out that King Solomon had been dead for hundreds of years. The sudden realization that he had been freed by a mere mortal instantly wiped away all of the jinni's fear, and he calmly told his rescuer to prepare for his own death. The fisherman was now trapped on an isolated beach with an apex predator, facing an opponent he could neither outrun nor outfight. Long ago, the jinni held immense historical power, but his rebellion against King Solomon's orders led to his eternal imprisonment at the bottom of the sea. This chart tracks his isolation. Initially, the jinni vowed to reward his rescuer with wealth. Over centuries, that intention rotted. The timeline plummets into a toxic vow to murder his freer. The innocent fisherman stands at this explosive endpoint, absorbing centuries of stored hatred. Staring down this enormous threat, the fisherman made a critical calculation. His physical strength was entirely useless, and pleading with a creature driven by centuries of blind rage was guaranteed to fail. To survive a fight against an infinitely stronger opponent, the underdog must completely abandon the physical battlefield. The only viable target left was the jinni's mind. The fisherman recognized that the jinni's massive ego, bruised by centuries of helpless captivity, was his only exposed nerve. Instead of cowering, the old man abruptly changed his posture. He crossed his arms, shook his head, and openly mocked the creature, feigning complete disbelief. He looked the towering monster up and down and loudly declared that a being of such magnificent size could never have squeezed into such a pathetic, tiny piece of brass. It was a painfully obvious provocation. But the Jinni, blinded by his own arrogance and desperate to reassert his dominance after centuries of humiliation, stopped thinking rationally and immediately took the bait. The Jinni roared with laughter at the human stupidity. To prove his absolute power, he instantly dissolved into a thick cloud of swirling smoke, aggressively compressing downward and funneling into the narrow neck of the jar. This is the exact mechanism of the ego trap. Extreme power often generates supreme arrogance, creating a massive psychological blind spot that a vastly weaker opponent can easily exploit. The instant the last wisp of black smoke cleared the rim, the fisherman lunged forward and slammed the heavy lid shut. He pressed the ancient seal firmly back into place, effectively weaponizing Solomon's original magic to securely lock the indestructible threat away once again. The violent storm vanished, the sky cleared, and the quiet rhythm of the morning returned as the sun finally crested over a calm Arabian Sea. By navigating the Jinni's ego, the fisherman achieved through strategy what brute force never could. He turned his opponent's own arrogance into the key to its cage, winning the day entirely through the